Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Comic Boom Comic Source collaboration. It is your spotlight for the week of January 29th, 2025, DC Spotlight. It's the fifth Wednesday of a month. So, as is usually the case, it's a much smaller week. In fact, when I went to my shop today, there was only one issue in my pull box. And the guy that works there, obviously a friend of mine since I go in every Wednesday, he's like, "Oh, I'm sure you'll find other stuff on the shelf," and I didn't. I didn't. It was a little surprising. So I'm like, put that book back. I'm not going to run my card for only one book. Not that there weren't some really strong independent titles, but I'd already pre-ordered them because I'm such a fiend for comics. I pre-order through DCBS just because it's cheaper, but I still go into my shop every week and spend another $20 to $40, sometimes more. But yeah, a bit of all that to say, a bit of a smaller week. So there's only four books from DC this week. But so obviously all four by default are in our top five. But I gotta say that I don't. I think only two of the books would have made a top five if there was anything else. Because two of them are anthologies, which again tends to happen when you have a fifth week. A lot of times they'll do anthologies or specials or uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Annuals. So yeah, I mean, 50% were good. The other 50, I mean, there's only one that I really struggled to get through, and we'll talk about it when we get there. But yeah, how'd you feel about the week overall, Rock?
Well, there's not a lot of comics this week. I'm not. I've never been a big fan of anthologies much in the modern age for a whole slew of reasons. Because DC is such a continuity-rich universe, and I find anthologies to be, for me, I don't really feel like I need to read them half the time, and that's that. I know that's unfair. It's unfair to the writers, many of which are up and comers, and they want to get their feet wet, and they want to get some experience. Uh, I'm sorry, I just can't help that. It's just the way it is. But I do read them, and I hope that at some point, the comic books are, that the stories are competent enough that they're going to get their big break somewhere down the line. But I was, I was. There's two comics that I really like. The rest were pretty meh to me. But and anthologies are not my cup of tea. But it's the mainstream titles I'm more of a fan of this week, and I don't think it's going to be a surprise. I'm confident you and I will probably pick the same pick of the week. Uh, uh, if not, we'll be within one or two of it anyway.
Yeah,
Versus,
by default, because I'm sure it's the same two that we
yeah,
enjoyed. Yeah, we've talked about this before. A little hypocritical about saying didn't want anthologies because we were like banging the drum for, hey, DC needs to release things as a quarterly, a bigger book, have multiple stories, and sort of by definition that is an anthology. But the more I've thought about it, it's like what we were advocating for is, so instead of having a monthly Batman book, for example, the title Batman, which maybe it's a bad example because that's a legacy title and it's going to go on forever and people want their Batman collection. Kind of similar to Action Comics, another great example. I have my Action Comics run, even when it's bad. People like Bendis are writing, I'm still picking it up. But my point being that instead of putting a book out 12 times a year, you're essentially putting a book out four times a year. So you're getting 60, maybe 66 pages. 20, 22 page comic is pretty standard these days. So if you're consolidating that into a quarterly, you're getting basically the equivalent of three issues, and you get it four times a year. So you get a bigger chunk of story, um, and it's a little easier to remember, what's going on, and it's in a bigger package, and you can expose people to other characters, right? So if I'm buying, whatever the Gotham Quarterly, it's got 60 to 66 pages of what would have been in Batman, what would have been in whatever else is coming out, a Nightwing, let's say, Red Hood if that he's got a title, Robin if he's got a title. So it saves money in a lot of different ways. It costs less because you're not printing monthly books every single week, and you're not having to pay to ship them, which saves a lot of money, saves the environment, or what have you. That's kind of what we were always advocating for. I mean, you're right. These anthologies, as we've said many times, it's a way to get people that don't have as established of a career in comics, kind of a tryout, and there is value in that. But at the same time, the stories just aren't that compelling. So, all that being said, uh, we'll kick it off here with Lex in the City, which is DC's Valentine's Day special this year. And you might be like, well, what do you mean Lex in the City is about? So, and I didn't, I guess I'm just dumb or old, whatever. I didn't catch it the first time or the first several times I saw, okay, Lex in the City. I knew there was a Lex Luthor special coming because
Yeah.
DC had been talking about it and how it tied into the current Superman storyline. But then there's also a Superman Lex special. So I was like, well, which one's which? Maybe there's two. Maybe this one just tells Lex Luthor stories to give some context. And it wasn't until I went to read this thing and I said it out loud, Lex in the City, and I realized, oh, Sex in the City, right? The show that was on HBO for years and years,
Yeah.
that was a romance or drama or whatever the hell it was. I don't know. I never watched it, but that's where the whole idea of, hey, this is a bunch of love stories comes in, and why it's the Valentine's Day special. So all that being said, it was a struggle to get through this thing, a real struggle for me. Um, it was just such a slog. There wasn't really any of these stories that really stood out to me. But let me go through the credits first, and then if there's any specifically that we want to talk about, we can. So the first one, Lex in the City, story and art by Cena Grace, colors by Nick Filardi, letters by Pat Broso. Second is a Harley Quinn Poison Ivy story, a Valentine's Day gift for Poison Ivy, written by Maggie Tokuda Hall, art by Leslie Hung, colors by Rachel Cosen, or Cohen, sorry. Letters by Taylor Esposito. And then we've got a Mr. Freeze story written by Jonathan Rivera with art by Michael Avon Oming, colors by Nick Filardi, and letters by Ariana Mayer. A Titan story in Together Again, written by Charles Skaggs with art by Serge Acuna, colors by Alex Guermas, letters by Josh Reed. A Robin story, To Live and Date in Gotham, written by Brendan Hay, art and colors by Stephen Byrne, colors by letters by Carlos M. Mangual. The Riddler in Riddle Me Kiss, written by Sabrina Futch, art by M.L. Sanapo, colors by Arif Prianto, letters by Troy Petrie. Raven and Beast Boy in Roses Are Red, Blood Is Too, written by Callie C. Miller, art by Lisa Sturl, colors by Marisa Louise, letters by Jaime Martinez. And then finally, a Hawkman story, Heartbreak Lake, written by Dave Welguz, art by Howard Porter, colors by Hi-Fi, letters by Dave Sharp. Any of these that you want to comment on, Rocky?
Uh, two. Do you want me to go first?
Yeah,
Here.
go ahead.
Okay. Lex in the City. I actually thought. And by the way, I completely missed it too. I mean, I never really watched much of Sex in the City, so I never really caught on till later. Like Lex in the City, I thought this was a Lex Luthor focused anthology. That's what I thought. So I was extremely disappointed, and I feel misled. Even though I might feel like a fool now for being misled, I nonetheless feel misled. But I like Lex in the City, the story and art by Cena Grace. I actually thought it was interesting in insofar as Lex Luthor having kind of a quasi date with Trisha Q, who I thought was the gossip columnist for the Daily Planet. Apparently, he's just I thought the characterization, Cena Grace's characterization of Lex Luthor was a little bit off, but clearly Lex Luthor was just sort of playing like a game with Trisha Q. He's sort of like testing her, and maybe seeing if he could manipulate her, and invites her to a party and shows her his panic room, and she stands up to him and still writes a scathing article about him, and that gets Lex Luthor's respect. And okay, I thought that was okay. I guess that's Lex Luthor playing games with women, and I guess I can see that he's playing games with reporters. He's flaunting his stuff. He's always trying to manipulate people, so that wasn't bad. The only other one I liked was I actually didn't mind the Hawkman one because it shows the it shows the Hawkman story written by Dave Wilgaz and Howard Porter and the artist. I thought it was interesting because it seemed to suggest that Hawkman he loves Shiera, but he still mentions Kendra Saunders a little bit. Shiera is his first love, but there's still some overlap with Kendra Saunders. And so, because there's the Hawk woman, Shiera, and then there's Hawk girl, who's Kendra Saunders. I note that we had a Hawk Girl story a while back in an anthology, I think it was, where Kendra Saunders has sort of wrote off Hawkman, saying she's no longer tied to him. And while they aren't tied to him, Hawkman is still clearly in love with both of them, but a little bit more in love with Shiera. So I thought that was interesting. And I want to at least say that reading this Hawkman story kind of makes me long for a Hawkman comic again. I'd love a Hawkman comic again, and I would really like to explore that interesting triangle. There ought to be one between Hawkman, Carter Hall, Shiera, and Kendra Saunders. So I like that aspect of it. But the other stories I thought were just sort of like typical Valentine Day fodder, well written, but not enough to get me to want to actually pick up the anthology itself. But what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, same, same. So, interestingly enough, the Lex story is the first one, and I am a fan of Cena Grace. I think he's tremendously talented, and so that was the first story. And so I was like, okay, maybe this is not going to be so bad. It was pretty interesting, like you said. It definitely uh, feels sort of classic. I mean, I go back to what it's one of my favorite Lex Luthor stories, and it was a backup early on in the John Byrne run where Lex has dinner or lunch rather at a diner, and he tempts a woman, tempts his waitress with $1 million to spend the weekend with him, and eventually pulls away without her ever making the decision, and it's kind of the psychological torture, and it just sums up who Luthor is. And it was great at the time it came out, right? Because that was the beginning of the Byrne era, like I said, when this was the Lex sort of reimagined as this business tycoon, which has pretty much been the status quo for Lex since then, although he has donned his power armor at various times. But so I did enjoy that one as much as I'm. Trisha Q for me is kind of a wonky character. If I'm not mistaken, she was a Bendis creation when he did Action
I think you're
Comics.
right. Yes,
Yeah,
that's correct.
yeah. So we haven't really seen much of her, but as a Superman fan, I do like when we see supporting characters, and so this is fleshing her out, and it was interesting enough, but I didn't really feel like it has any long term consequences. Which that's to your point you were making earlier about these anthologies not really being tied into continuity. But then the Hawkman story is the last story, and I also would say that that's the two, if I had to pick two, um, these are the two that stood out for me. The only two that I would have really wanted to talk about because I think the others are really forgettable. Um, I really enjoy the art. I mean, Howard Porter's art for me kind of runs hot and cold. Sometimes it's a little too loose. The line work is a little too loose for my taste, but I thought this was really great. And Welgaz, he really seems to have kind of a grasp on who the modern Hawkman is. Much like yourself, I would love a Hawkman ongoing. I mean, I really enjoyed the Robert Venditti Hawkman ongoing. Um, and man, I know Robert personally, and he really wanted that series to get to 50. A Hawkman series has never made it to 50 issues.
Yeah.
That one didn't either. I think it ended in the 30s. Um, but yeah, it might be time. I mean, that was a few years ago. So yeah, I mean, the whole love triangle thing. I get why it's in a Lex in the City, a Valentine's Day anthology. It's not as interesting to me, but I wouldn't mind it fleshed out only because I kind of never understood. I mean, I get it, right? Like, um, Kendra Saunders is technically the Hawk Woman of or Hawk Girl of Earth 2. Um, but it's still, I don't know, the relationship is still wonky to me. There's really only one Hawkman. It's not like we have two Carter Halls, an Earth 2 version and a regular version flying around. Which, yeah, that whole Earth 2, because I love that series, especially because most of it has Nicola Scott art. Started off being written by James Robinson, and then Tom Taylor. There was another writer as well, I think, that might have finished it up or came in between the two. But regardless, I mean, think about some of those characters. That version of Jay Garrick Flash, that version of
Well, I think
Alan
that
Scott
version of
Green
Hawkgirl
Lantern.
was different. You're thinking of Earth Two Society, Earth Two,
Or
because
yeah, just Earth 2. Yeah, was
that
that
was a
was
black
it
that was
different?
a Black Hawk Girl. Yeah, that was a different
Oh,
one.
that's right. You're right. You're right. So this
Yeah,
Kendra Saunders, she was the one that was introduced by Jeff Johns in JSA.
yeah. That's
Yeah,
correct. Yes.
yeah. So that
Yeah.
makes it even more weird. I mean, I thought that again, going back to the Robert Venditti Hawkman series, um, he did such a fantastic job of explaining why Hawkman's continuity is so wonky. I guess you could apply the same reasoning to Hawk Girl, but yet there there are two distinct Hawk women, if you will, which it doesn't really make sense to me. And it doesn't make sense fairly enough. It doesn't make sense to a lot of DC writers either, because you and I have seen it all the time where a writer will call out Kendra Saunders as being Thanagarian, which is not the case. Yet it happens all the time. So anyway, yeah, all that to say, I would love a Hawkman series, because and that's part of why we were so excited when we got this recent Hawk Woman series, Hawk Girl series. Um, but it didn't do anything like that or try to explain anything. It felt like it was more reason to bring Galaxy back.
Yeah,
And yeah, it
yeah,
was not
definitely.
what we had hoped for at all. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. If you want some Valentine's romance, I guess go ahead and pick this up. But I mean, I can't in good conscience recommend it for the price point, because I think it's like $8.99. Um, but it does have a fantastic main cover by Amanda Connor, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, again, I'm not a Sex and the City guy. I don't know. I think that's an homage. The image, the posing, the composition is an homage to Sex and the City in some way. I don't know. Maybe it's the initial
Yeah, in the
promotional.
opening sequence, one of the stars gets splashed on by a bus driving by
Okay,
with her
there you go.
picture on it. Yeah,
There you go.
yeah,
So, uh, but yeah, I mean, I thought overall these are competent stories. They're paced well.
yeah.
The writing is adequate, and the art overall is pretty strong. I didn't have any of the ones where the art took me out of the story. Um, but it just weren't interesting. Like, I was literally struggling to stay awake when I was reading a lot of these, um, except for the Hawkman one. And the first, the Lex in the city one, the first one, like I mentioned, that I enjoyed, and so I was like, oh, maybe it's not going to be so bad. But it was the first one, and then as I went on and on, I got more and more tired, and I was like, I gotta get through this. And then the Hawkman one kind of woke me up, which took me into the next book that we're going to talk about. Like I said, it's also an anthology, DC Power, Rise of the Power Company. So we have Josiah Power in Company Man, written by Brandon Thomas. Charles Stewart III is the penciler. Anthony Fowler Jr. on inks. Ulysses Areola handles the colors. Then we've got Vixen and Bolt in Ring of Power. Bolt being not the dog from the movie, but being the heir to Black Adam, which, man, what the heck's going on with that character these days? Who knows? It's written by Zippora Smith. She's done a lot of work in these anthologies lately. Kelsey Ramsey is the artist. Francesco Segala handles colors. Then we've got Cyborg and Green Lantern in Unfinished Business, written by John Jennings. Keenan White and Adigan Ilhan are the artists. Andrew Dahlhaus on colors. Um, and then we've got Batman and the Signal in Dynamic Duo, written by Vita Ayala, Ray Anthony Height on art, Chris Sotomayor on colors, and all of the stories, they're all lettered by Androl Design. And when I say, I should mention, when I say Cyborg and Green Lantern, we are talking about Joe Mullen, Green Lantern, who we haven't seen. It hasn't been that long since we saw in the pages of Green Lantern. So I definitely felt this was stronger than the Lex in the City anthology, because it feels like it's going somewhere. It feels like we could lead into something else. And the Josiah Power story, it's split up a little bit, right? So it's almost a framing story. We start off with that story, and then we end with that story. And we've seen, it's a literally chapter one. Company Man chapter one starts off the book, and then Company Man chapter two ends it. Same creative team for both parts. But at the end of chapter two, it even says the story continues in the pages of Black Lightning. The Power Company will return. So it does seem like we're headed toward a return of the Power Company with Josiah Power, whose powers have been amped up, I guess you'd say, or leveled up because of the events of Absolute Power. We've seen Josiah Power show up in the pages of Black Lightning, the current Black Lightning series, which Brandon Thomas is also writing. So this one felt a lot more tied into kind of what's going on. The middle stories sort of non-withstanding, unless I mean, there's a possibility that if we do get a Power Company series, even if it's a mini series or what have you, that some of these characters that are showing up here in this anthology are the characters that Josiah Powers goes and recruits for his new Power Company. I mean, that's entirely possible. But the thing is, these stories, they don't inherently have anything to do with the Power Company in this anthology, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not like none of the team ups here. And I do note that that they're they're all team ups, which was kind of fun. It's always fun to have um, characters teaming up, especially characters where they haven't met before, like Vixen and Bolt, and to my knowledge, Cyborg and Joe Mullen um, haven't met before either. Signal and Batman, it's the Luke Fox version of Batman, which they haven't met either, and that's very sort of meta in the story. That it's the first time they're meeting. It's kind of mentioned. So that's fun, but none of the stories, at no point during any of these team ups do any characters that are teaming up mention Josiah Power or the Power Company to each other. So it was kind of like, what do these three middle stories have to do with Power Company and Josiah Power? Like nothing, as far as I know.
Yeah.
So again, it could be that if Power Company does continue or comes back as a title, that these characters do become the Power Company, and then it would make more sense. But in the meantime, the middle three stories are not, because they have no connection to anything. They're a little bit forgettable. Except I thought that the Luke Fox characterization was almost over the line. Like, didn't seem like Luke. Like the way he gets so pissed off when the Signal shows up and helps fight alongside him, and he freaks out. That didn't ring that true to me. So that was a little wonky. But I get it. It was needed for the story, the way the story played out, or what have you. But yeah, I mean, I thought the middle three were okay. I thought the story by Brandon Thomas was pretty strong. Definitely the highlight. And I thought that one had the best art as well. Although all the art's decent to good. The Power Company, or the what did I say it was called? The Company Man story art. I thought was the best, which is
Yeah.
interesting because it's traditional, right? In that you got one person on pencils and one person on inks, as opposed to most comic art these days is just digital pencils right to colors, and I think something's lost there. So anyway, what are your thoughts on this Power Company or DC Power anthology, Rocky?
I was overall I was disappointed with it, but I will agree it's better than the Lex and the City anthology. I I was actually a little bit confused. I didn't think it was particularly. Uh, I mean, I kind of caught on what was going on, which is to say a power. I thought it was confusing. I don't really know anything about them. I never collected the Power Company. I still don't know anything about the Power Company. It wasn't a very good introduction of the Power Company, of the concept, of the team. What is it exactly? I don't know. I still don't know. And I don't feel inclined to want to get to know more about it. I don't know who Josiah Power is. It sounds as if he inherited some powers from his nephew, I guess. And now and then all of it, and the other thing is, it just seems odd that all of these characters just seem to hang out with. If you want to, like again, I get that you want to give diverse character, black characters more attention, but the black characters, I guess, just hang out with black characters. Well, why don't you have them hang out with the rest of the DC universe, and have the story framing around that? I mean, I get it, but it just seems it just I think it's an uncreative choice, to be blunt. Uh, the story is I guess it's okay, but it's not compelling enough. I also Christopher Priest did a fantastic job on Black Adam, that 12 issue series. I really enjoyed it. You and I generally enjoyed it. Um, somehow this Bolt. I don't recall Bolt having it in his ring. I don't. There was no I was lost on exactly why Bolt has a ring and he can only access the powers through the ring. I didn't think that was the case. I don't remember that being the case, but maybe I stand to be corrected. I thought that was confusing too, to be honest with you, and it wasn't particularly clear. I question whether people reading this blind are going to have any interest in Bolt or Vixen, or I just thought, this was very meh to me. Overall, I was just basically disappointed, And I almost feel, while I think the stories could be a little bit better, I will defend the writers here. I think these characters aren't giving enough attention to begin with in the mainstream DC universe, and so when they're relegated to just a one shot anthology from time to time like this, it reminds me a lot of the obstacles that the Milestone universe has, where I think that not enough comics comes out enough for readers to appreciate the potential that these characters have. These characters should be given more attention in the mainstream. Thankfully, we got Black Lightning. I will look forward to learning more about Josiah Power in the pages of Black Lightning. Brandon Thomas is a writer that I think he hasn't had as much. Uh, he hasn't, ironically, he hasn't grown to the extent that I wish Brandon Thomas would have had a more flourishing, sort of exciting beginning as much as maybe Jeremy Adams did. Jeremy Adams seemed to blossom. Brandon Thomas seemed to, I guess, I think have a lull period there, but I'm still waiting for him to sort of break out. Uh, because I think he's very creative. I don't know if he's quite found his footing yet. But in any event, there's a lot of interesting ideas here. Really, there are in these individual stories. I just wish, what's going to come of these. I mean, other than in the pages of Black Lightning, I want to see Bolt. That's kind of a cool idea. I want to see Black Adam again. I want to see. It's just sort of sad that I like Bolt. He was more interesting when he was in the pages of Black Adam than he is here. And I don't always like the idea that these anthologies are separated essentially by race. It shouldn't be the case all the time, because these are great enough characters that we should all be interacting together. And I think I might be saying something more outside of comics as well, speaking to the general state of the world. But in anyways, I'll be quiet now. But yeah, it was mixed feelings on this one.
Yeah, I don't know that I would have. I mean, Brandon Thomas has Eisner nominations, and I think Jeremy deserves Eisner nominations, or at least some kind of acknowledgement for what a fantastic job he's done at DC. Um, but I mean, Brandon Thomas, I mean, I agree with you. His profile at DC has not been as impactful, I'll say, as Jeremy Adams. But at the same time, Thomas has that Eisner nom and very successful, very extremely successful independent title or I should say, an excellent independent title in excellence. So I think maybe the focus has been a little different for the two, but I kind of feel like they're on equal footing in terms of the amount of success that they've had. But yeah, you certainly wouldn't say that they're A-list writers where they're moving the needle on sales like a Scott Snyder is, let's say. But then I don't think anybody moves the needle as much as Scott Snyder does. He probably has the biggest following these days. Quick primer, if you will, on Power Company. So it was during one or another alien invasion where the aliens set off a gene bomb that triggered the metagene. It's a story that's happened a few times. The first one being Invasion, but this happened around the 2000s. And that's when Josiah Power's metagene was unlocked. But he had no interest in being kind of a traditional superhero, being a lawyer and what have you. But he did want to make a difference. So he formed the Power Company. He recruited some other people that were, kind of that same sort of reluctant hero type. And they were almost like a heroes for hire. So if you had a problem, you could go and hire the Power Company and they would help you out and what have you. I mean, the whole idea of superheroes as a service, which I guess it's in a way a very lawyer thing to do, and so that's who Josiah Power was. Now, his original powers back then is he could turn into rock, sort of like the Thing, except he could turn it off and on, and that was it. So we've seen here, like I said, leveled up. Like now he's got some powers where if he doesn't, they're sending him to Mars so he can like explode and all this radiation that he is storing up is released. They're trying to find a way to control that. So I mean, again, it's a much more he's sort of more dangerous to himself and those around him, but he has the potential to be more powerful than just turning into a rock like he did before. So it doesn't really have anything to do with his nephew per se. Although we know that the background is his nephew was killed during the events of Absolute Power because his nephew, which makes sense, his nephew must have had a metagene as well. It is hereditary; they share bloodlines. But yeah, his nephew was killed. So that's why he's sort of an advocate for those that are superpowered, because he has the background in law, because he's an African American character. So you have that sort of inherent sense of being wronged, where he feels like he needs to fight for equality. So yeah, his powers don't necessarily have to do with his nephew dying, but it's kind of spurred him to be active again, and it certainly sets up a reason to bring the power company back if that's what they want to do. So that's real quick and dirty power company background, if you will. And yeah, it was a series. I think it was like around 2002. It was written by Kurt Busiek. Lasted, I want to say, for like 18 issues. I never read it, and it wasn't like a sales juggernaut by any means. It barely made a blip, even the first issue. I imagine you can find it in dollar bins, or maybe go on eBay and buy the whole thing for probably less than $20, plus shipping. Um, so even now they're not, it's not like a sought after. And Josiah Powers, I think he showed up, I want to say, like right around JLA 67 or 68 was his first appearance. And that, again, that's not like, oh my God, that's a $10 book or whatever. That's like a $2 book. So if you're a big fan, and you think the power company's coming back and it might see a sales bump, you might want to, speculate or alert, whatever. It's not like that comic was underprinted. I'm sure there's thousands and thousands of copies of it. But anyway, that's a little background on Josiah Power and the Power Company. All right. Up next, speaking of Jeremy Adams, we have Green Lantern number 19. When Jeremy was on last time, we did talk about this a little bit. We didn't want to get too spoilery because it was a few weeks away. But anyway, it's written by him. We have art by Fernando Passerin and Auclair Albert with Jason Paz. Romulo Fajardo Jr. handles the colors. Letters are by Dave Sharp. Give us your thoughts on this one, Rocky.
Um, well, I this this particular issue, Jeremy Adams decided to call this "Loose Threads," and I think it's appropriately named because it feels like there's a number of loose threads in it. And I got to give him high compliments because this almost feels like it could be almost a quasi Valentine Day issue. I really enjoyed it. I got to give the Fernando Passerin art, and also with Auclair Albert and Jason Paz on the art, Romeo Fujita on the colors. Uh, this is a lot. This is a lot of fun. We meet a number of new characters. Hal Jordan comes back to Earth. He's with Star Sapphire, so him and Carol Ferris seem to, they seem to get it on. They seem to enjoy each other's company intimately in various places in the Justice League satellite and on the ground, and of course all the other Justice Leaguers can't help but to notice their affection for each other, which isn't really much of a surprise. Wonder Woman or Superman seems to think that it's Batman's only annoyed because Hal's actually happy, and so there's some really good moments here. Jeremy Adams, he knows all these characters and he knows their voices well, and he gives them all personality, and it shows, and he does it all in one issue. And this is something that he's getting better and better and better at. And this is something that it's not easy to do. If it was easy to do, every other writer would do it. But every other writer, most decidedly, is not doing it. So they should take notes. Um, in fact, Cy Spurrier might want to take some notes. Hint, hint. But in any event, we get we get uh, we meet a new character called Odyssey the Time Bandit, who ends up being caught by Kyle Rayner, and because she's trying to steal a ring, and he's she's she manages to escape, and Kyle Rayner's really interested in her because she seems to have had the ability to escape. When the Source Lantern exploded, she managed to find a way to escape, unlike some others, and so she might have some abilities that might help him in their investigation regarding the fractured spectrum. And there's some really comical moments here where where they end up going and they end up meeting up with John Kent. And John Kent seems very smitten with Odyssey.
It's Connor. It's
Connor
Connell.
Kent. Thank
Yeah.
you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not John Kent,
Yeah.
although I probably wish it was. He probably, just to piss off Jay Nakamura, but that's another topic.
Mhm.
But yeah, thank you. It's Connor Kent. And Connor, I mean, Connor, I don't think Connor's. Connor probably hasn't gotten any in a while, so the guy deserves probably to have a relationship. I think the last time I saw Connor Kent, I think didn't oh, and that was it Vida Ayala in her story that she had Connor Kent doing his nails in some in any
Mags,
event.
I think it was Mags Visaggio that was trying to
Max
turn him
Versace,
into
yeah,
um, what was it? Connie.
Connie,
Connie can't trying to make him trans. Yeah,
trying to
it
make him
didn't. It didn't.
trans.
Yeah, it didn't stick.
Uh,
Turning
Well,
him into a female didn't stick. And
well, as a
that was a very divide. You had a lot of people are like, "Oh, we love this. He's going to become a woman," and the other people are like, "No, we hate this. He's going to become a woman." But
yeah,
yeah, I don't think it sold very well, and so
yeah,
it was just such strange timing too, right? Because we had just had the Kenny Porter series where he was off in space trying to find his identity and seemed to, and
yeah,
then all of a sudden it was that was the thing. The timing of it was really. I mean, I would prefer him as as the Connor that I know, where he's
yeah.
male. Um, so
Well, he's
yeah, that the timing was just so wonky. It was
it was
terribly
wonky,
done. Yeah,
but right now, Connor Kent seems to be competing with Nightwing here. There's a really a Passer and Draws. I think it's Passer and Draws, that page where he's a full body shot of Connor Kent almost showing himself off, and him and Odyssey seem to have, I don't know if it's love at first sight, but it's certainly lust at first sight. Connor seems to be sort of lost in Odyssey's eyes, and it's actually kind of comical. Jeremy Adams does a really good job of it. So between Hal Jordan and Carol Ferris and Odyssey and Connor Kent, there's some really sort of interesting potential romantic moments here. And meanwhile, we get Hal Jordan flying off to explore because they pick up readings that there's another possible uh, ab- uh, consequence of the fractured spectrum, and he investigates that this in another planet, and apparently somebody who got really mad uh, ended up destroying an entire half of an entire village on a planet or something. And I don't know. I'm assuming this is supposed to be a rage as like a Red Lantern, because I don't imagine what's the difference between being mad and being rage filled? I'm assuming this is just the Red Lantern sort of part of the fractured spectrum. So we're getting we're the mystery sort of continues, or it's important that the sorrow that sorrow be found, that sorrow not be allowed to create his own lantern, or it'll further fracture the other lanterns, and chaos will reign. So there's all kinds of things to be weary about. There is the Starbreaker core that's explored here. So Starbreaker is likely attempting to create his own core, and likely that's going to be linked to his, what I'm assuming is his agenda to ferment the fractured spectrum from becoming a reality. So lots of stuff. Jeremy Adams is this lot of loose little threads here, plot threads here, planting a lot of seeds for future plots and subplots, romantically and otherwise, in terms of action. I really enjoy this. This feels like, again, Jeremy Adams is channeling his best John Jones, Jeff Johns, and he's doing it very well. He's keeping me engaged as a reader. I'm excited to see what happens next. Absolutely, this was a candidate for pick of the week. Was for me. What are your thoughts?
yeah, it's interesting. You know, we had the special, the fractured spectrum special, which sort of put the idea of what the fractured spectrum is in place, along with the new revelations on the Book of Oa, how there's 6 different versions and what have you. We saw Sorrow show up there and um, eventually escape with the Book of Oa. Now we know that he's taken it to Starbreaker. So that was a bit of a setup. Now this part is like, okay, let's see where all the other lanterns are and how they're going to deal with this and what have you. So, you know, as much as Hal and Carol wish they could be together, Carol's basically being used by Mark Waid as Star Sapphire in JLU, Justice League Unlimited, as very much as a sort of a point of view character. She's, you know, a more traditional superhero now than she ever has been, which in a way feels like it would make her closer to Hal because she's going to get a better perspective on, you know, all of the things that go with being a superhero and the things he's dealt with over the years. well, at the same time, Hal's dealing with this fractured spectrum situation, and they don't get to be together. So almost like star-crossed lovers in a way. Um, and I think Jeremy handles that really well with a very heartfelt conversation that they have here, and how much they care about each other. And I mean, I love when Hal and Carol are together. It just works for me. So that's half of the story that I really loved. And then the other half, like you mentioned, is the Kyle Rayner part where he's putting together a team based on the mission that Hal gave him to, figure out what's going on with the fractured spectrum, and kind of hunt down anybody who's manifesting these powers without a ring, and what have you. So it feels a little bit, and this was a feeling I got. I mean, I read these back to back, right? Like I read the Fractured Spectrum special, and then I immediately read Green Lantern 19 in preparation to chat with Jeremy the last time I had him on. So when I got finished reading these two, because one leads into the other, it was like very clear to me. Okay, we're going on a MacGuffin hunt, right? Like it's a classic, comic books storytelling kind of device, if you will, and not just like superhero comics or whatever. I remember the first animated GI Joe movie that came out in 5 parts. That was a MacGuffin hunt as well, right? Like there was a secret weapon, and he needed like 3 different materials to make it work, and so it was GI Joe and Cobra racing to get to the materials. This is kind of the same thing. We're going to have the Starbreaker Corps racing to get whatever is needed, while you have the Green Lantern team that Hal Jordan is putting together, and they're not even all Green Lanterns, but this team that Hal Jordan is putting together to Kyle Rayner rather is putting together to go and try to get whatever it is before the Starbreaker Corps can get their hands on it. So yeah, even though it's sort of a cliche, I mean, there's a reason it's a cliche. It's because it works. It's the racing against each other to try to get to the thing, the MacGuffin, before the other team can or the other side can get it. So I expect it to work really well. I expect it to be a lot of fun. Because it's been done so many times, it can have a tendency to feel overwrought if you don't do it correctly. But that's the thing. With this level of art, with the talent that Jeremy has for storytelling, to bring in a bunch of different characters, and they all have their own moments, and there's humor injected, and there's big epic scenes, and what have you, both in terms of adding to the mythos of Green Lantern plus action, that it's going to work really, really well. So yeah, I mean, it's a strong candidate for book of the week. And even had there been a lot of other titles this week, I think it still would be a candidate. It's not just I'm not just saying, okay, by default this is going to be book of the week, because we do have one other book to talk about that might be a contender as well, and it is the Superman Lex Luthor special, written by Joshua Williamson. Art is by Eddie Barrows and Eber Ferreira. Colors by Adriana Lucas. Letters by Dave Sharp. Honestly, there's not that much to this story. It's almost in a way, it's a lot of it's very much an emotional story, with Lex being forced to make a decision. So we know that during the events of the what did they call it? It wasn't the Brainiac War. Do you remember what that event was called that led into absolute
House of
power?
Brainiac? House of
House
Brainiac.
of Brainiac. That was it. House of Brainiac. Yeah, I knew it wasn't the Brainiac War. But anyway, during those events, Lex Luthor basically had his mind invaded, I guess that's the word, by Brainiac, and it caused some damage, and he's got amnesia now, and he's a very different person. He's not quite to the level of brilliant that he was in the past. He's still very smart, but he has empathy. He has emotion and morality, much more so than he ever has before. He's not like the conniving, evil Lex Luthor. He's nearly likable. The reason I say nearly is because we haven't seen enough of him, or it hasn't, this sort of current status quo for Luthor hasn't been in place long enough um, to really say, yeah, he is likable. So the quandary here, the Gordian knot, if you will, that he's presented with, is that due to the events that happened in the DC All In special, and what happened with Darkseid, and what have you, Mr. Terrific's been trying to figure out what the long term consequences of that are. But in his own words, he's hit a brick wall. Um, and he said, when the totality was formed, our mission was to monitor the changes in time and space, and that's how we discovered the else world, right? Which is one of the terms for what we now know as Earth Zero, not to be confused with Earth Prime, but Earth Zero, which is the absolute world where the absolute stories are taking place. But Mr. Miracle hasn't been able to find out what's going on. He hasn't been able to reach it and we know the multiverse is closed off right now. And so these are the challenges that he's struggling to find and solve. But he does, while he's trying to figure it out, he realizes that Elseworld, that part of the multiverse that he thinks that's where Darkseid went, and he's trying to learn more about, that it's headed down a darker path, which, in his mind, that makes sense if that's where Darkseid ended up. But again, he hasn't been able to figure anything out. He's sort of to use his words, like I said before, he's hit a brick wall. And he thinks the one person that might be able to help would be Lex Luthor, right? The brilliance of Lex Luthor when he's that evil, scheming, manipulating, conniving sort of individual. So, Mr. Terrific presents this problem to Superman, and Superman says, well, Lex is not the same Lex that he was before. So he doesn't have the memories or the knowledge that he had as, like a research scientist, if you will, or, where he might be able to provide insight or whatever. Not to say he couldn't, figure it out and help you, but he's not going to be the silver bullet that Mr. Terrific hopes that he might be unless Lex somehow regains his memories. But Lex has heard all these stories, right, of what a terrible person he was in the recent past. He doesn't want to remember who he was. He doesn't want to go back to being the person that he was before. Like I said, he sort of has this newfound perspective, on life and morality, and he doesn't have the jealousy of Superman or the resentment or what have you. He's like, feels like he's genuinely a good person, or at least that's what Joshua Williamson is trying to portray, or the idea that he wants to get across. So if you're that kind of person and you feel like you have a chance at happiness and you've heard of all these terrible things you've done before, why would you want to go back to being that? He's even got a burgeoning romantic relationship with Mercy going on, and she seems to reciprocate. So it's a really interesting conundrum because, again, he seems to be a good person now. And if you're a good person and there's a situation you can help with that's going to, potentially save lives, wouldn't you want to help? But if he helps, he goes back to being not a good person, where he may end up harming people. So it's a real, like I said, a Gordian knot. It's a real dilemma. And, what's he going to choose and what have you? So that's sort of the conceit of the story. So it's not like there's a ton of action, and we get some flashbacks to when Luthor was a kid, and the way his father mistreated him. There's nothing new there in that terms. But I thought it was interesting. Ultimately, it seems like Lex has decided to remember, and he's using music as sort of a device, because he was taught to play the piano when he was very young by his mother, but that's sort of fallen by the wayside. His father didn't like him playing the piano. It was just a bunch of noise to him. But it seems like, and that's kind of the emotional connection where we get the flashbacks. But it seems like he's decided to ultimately remember, which I understand. Again, if you're a good person and you can help, you want to help. But I would have liked to have the sort of more naive, good Lex for a little while longer. But if they weren't really going to do anything with him, then I get it. I also sort of, Lex Luthor is the sort of nemesis of Superman. So, wasn't going to stay that way for long. And I imagine you want him to be sort of the evil Luthor again when the James Gunn Superman movie comes out, because he's not going to be a nice guy in that film. So you wouldn't want somebody picking up a Superman comic after seeing that movie and be like, why is Lex this sort of super nice guy with a girlfriend and what have you? It wouldn't make sense to people. So I get it. I get the return to him being evil. But in a way, I feel bad. I feel a little bit bad for him, that he's had to give up a potential chance to be a good person and live a good life and have a relationship with Mercy and what have you. So I guess kudos to Joshua Williamson for making me actually feel bad for Lex Luthor. So anyway, what was your take on it?
I thought this was one of Joshua Williamson's more brilliant stories. Actually, I think it's one of my favorite stories that he's ever written. To be honest, I think it's excellent for this. This could almost be a one shot. I thought it was absolutely brilliant how he used Lex's playing music as a young child as a framing device that brings this entire story together. A young Lex Luthor, abused psychologically by his father, uses music as a way to sort of escape, and he's a genius young child. And as a young child, his dad thinks he's a freak because he's too damn smart, and but Lex Luthor, as a young child, creates music that's capable of penetrating space and traveling through space. He creates a device, and that only certain people can hear it. And lo and behold, it's that music that is played that actually brings consolation and puts a young Clark Kent, an infant young Kal-El, to sleep, because Jonathan and Martha Kent can't put their young son to sleep. But he can hear this music, and it's ironic that a young Lex Luthor, who's slightly older than an infant Kal-El, actually helps bring peace to a young Superman at the beginning of this story, and then subsequently, it's remembering that music that Lex Luthor at the end creates music. According to Mr. Terrific, that he utilizes sounds that don't just penetrate space, but penetrate the multiverse, that Mr. Terrific's going to use to hopefully be able to communicate with the Elseworlds, i.e., Booster Gold, or try to communicate with Booster Gold. I thought it was absolutely brilliant, and done in an emotionally impactful way. The flashback sequences, which were appropriately in black and white, uh, beautifully rendered. Art was fantastic. I thought this was just a fantastic story. This could easily be a one shot. It's appropriately called The Sound of Super, and I think it works so well. I just I'm just I'm really impressed with this, and Superman himself, hearing the music as an adult, undoubtedly it's familiar to him. He's got super memory, so for Superman, he must remember that music as well. And I wonder if Superman, it's left to the reader, is Superman drawing that connection, thinking, "Oh my God, that sound that put me to sleep as a young infant that I remember." That was actually by Lex Luthor. He hears Lex Luthor playing the piano. That's how he knows Lex is back, is because he hears that music. And I think it's just so much is said in such a small amount of pages. I'm extremely impressed with this issue, and I as a one shot, this is the single best one shot, 20 page or 22 pages that Joshua Williamson has um, has scripted it, in my view. So yeah, so he impresses me. I'm blown away. I can't believe Joshua Williamson wrote this, to be honest, but he impressed me.
Talk about a backhanded compliment.
I know.
That's hilarious. So too funny. All right, well that does it for the individual issues that are out this week that we're going to talk about. There are some anthologies some collections as well. We have Absolute Mr. Miracle by Tom King and Mitch Gerrards, or Mitch Gerrards. Sorry, Mitch, can't believe I mispronounced your last name. So that's the oversized hardcover where you can see Mitch's art in stunning detail. We also have Static Shadows of Dakota trade paperback that collects the Vita Ayala, Marcus, I think it was Marcus Draper, no, Nicholas Draper Ivy, their 6 issue story. And then DC Power 2024 actually has a hardcover version that's out as well this week. So if you're so inclined, you can pick that up. There's also, I do want to mention, DC has been putting out these facsimile issues over the last little while, and there are a few of those out um, this week. Well, one is a facsimile. It's the Untold Legend of Batman. It's a limited edition, so basically a reprint of that classic story from I think it's late 70s, maybe it might be 1980. But there's also a noir edition, a black and white edition of the first issue of The Last Halloween that's out this week as well. So if you're so inclined, you can pick that up also. All right, like we said, it's a bit of a smaller episode this week because it's only a few books, and it's between two for book of the week. Rocky, what are you picking?
Uh, uh, the last one we reviewed, I the Superman one was the Lex Luthor special. I think was just absolutely fantastic. As I said, for reasons which I already stated, I just thought it was so heartfelt. I thought the Superman Lex Luthor special just hit all the right notes. We learned something about Lex Luthor. He made us feel for Lex Luthor, while at the same time, you know, telling us something about Superman's past, getting us right into Lex Luthor, the struggle he must be going through, and actually making us care for him, and actually making me really curious as to where this is going to lead and the role that Lex Luthor might play, uh, ultimately in what I imagine at some point is going to be their battle against Darkseid. Because remember Lex Luthor when with the totality and the dark multiverse, the role that he played and with Perpetua and all that, with Scott Snyder's run. Lex Luthor is somebody who he's had his play with multiversal power. He knows what that's like, and so it's going to be curious to see, is he going to play the villainous role, or is he going to play the anti-hero in the ultimate battle against Darkseid, which is obviously going to bear fruit at some point in the next year or two. So I know, I just think was excellent. But what about
Yeah,
yourself?
it's really interesting when you think about the recent history of Lex Luthor, right? Like he's always been a villain,
Yeah,
but again, Burns' choice to make him into this businessman, which what a lot of people would aspire to, right? Like the whole idea of pulling you up by your bootstraps and being rich and powerful and what have you, and an American success story, if you will,
yeah.
but not so similar to who he's based on in real life, a name I won't mention because I don't want it in my mouth, to be honest. Um, but it comes from family money. So did he really pull himself up from his bootstraps? No, it was daddy's money that got him started, or what have you. Um, but ultimately a villain, ultimately scheming and lying and breaking the law or whatever. But you look at really you can go back to Forever Evil, which was where he, kind of the lesser of two evils, if you will, ended up fighting against the crime syndicate, um, because he basically knew if the crime syndicate came to our Earth that they would take over and his power would be diminished. But because he fought on the side of angels there, and this was Jeff Johns' original idea. That was when he first became part of the Justice League, um,
Yeah.
coming out of Forever Evil, and said he was reformed and his power armor had the Superman symbol on it and what have you. And then that continued in Rebirth and during Dan Jurgens' Action Comics run, which was during Rebirth when it was coming out every 2 weeks. He was the hero. And then it was Scott Snyder that decided, no, that doesn't work for me. Jeff Johnson moved on. So Scott Snyder, in the leading up to the Year of the Villain, that totality story that you mentioned, Lex really swung back all the way to being as evil as he's ever been, um, manipulating things and trying to consolidate power for himself, which is what those events are what led him to being jailed when he finally was caught with his hand in the cookie jar because of the events of Year of the Villain, working with Perpetua and the Batman Who Laughs Last or whatever. And that's why he was jailed at the beginning, when Scott, not Scott, I was going to say Scott Williams. When Joshua Williamson's Superman run starts, he's in jail and he's trying to do the right thing. He's trying to reform. Maybe he's thinking back to when he was considered a hero and part of the Justice League. He renames LexCorp to SuperCorp and what have you. And then the events of House of Brainiac, he loses his memory, and now he's going to become villainous again. So he's really, over these last 10 years, uh, yeah, since, because I think Forever Evil was like 2014,
Yeah.
2013,
Quite the
somewhere in there.
villain's journey he's been on.
Yeah, he's quite the roller coaster here. This guy going up and down. Am I a good guy? Am I a bad guy? Whatever. I mean, you could make the argument that he's a little overused. I mean, he shows up in Superman comics just constantly, sort of the way that the Joker does, but the Joker's always bad. Um, but so I don't know. I mean, I feel a little hypocritical. I always complain about the Joker showing up too much. You could say the same thing about Lex, but maybe it's the difference of, yeah, him flipping back and forth between them trying to make him a good guy, trying to make him a bad guy. It is sort of fascinating. So I say all that to say, the reason that I'm going to pick Green Lantern 19 as my book of the week is because as much as I loved the Lex Luthor special, it does feel like it's not the whole story, right? We're left a little bit on a cliffhanger to see who is Lex now? Like, how's he going to act and what have you? And we'll see that in the pages of Superman. But that gives me a reason to pick Green Lantern 19, which, not that I need any other reason other than the quality of the story, the fantastic art, the introduction of Odyssey, her interactions with Connor Kent, which was fantastic. Seeing Carol Ferris, seeing the first appearance of the Starbreaker Corps, like so many reasons to love Green Lantern 19. So that's going to be my pick this week. Just a fantastic job. I guess
Yeah,
shout out to Jeremy Adams.
absolutely.
Um, I tongue in cheek, I I gave him a bad time when I didn't pick the Fractured Spectrum special. Told him he needed to step up his game. So yeah, obviously I was being facetious, but here you go, Jeremy. You're back on top with me picking your book as book of the week. I mean, when Jeremy left Flash, I was so disappointed that he wasn't going to be telling Flash stories. But I did say the silver lining being that he's going from one of my favorite DC characters to somebody that's even more a favorite. I mean, probably my top three DC heroes, favorite DC heroes in order are Superman, Green Lantern, and Hal Jordan, Green Lantern, and then Flash. It's Barry Allen, but Wally's fine too. It's Flash is Flash in a lot of ways, but those are my top three. And he's gone from Flash to Green Lantern. So I guess Superman's next. And he does joke that he's following the Jeff Johns path of success at DC because on Green Lantern and now he's doing Aquaman. And we know Jeff he did have a run on Superman, although it was prior to his run on Aquaman. But anyway, yeah, Green Lantern is my pick. Thought it was fantastic. It is a relatively small week this week, like we said, everybody. So don't forget to let us know in the comments what you thought of DC's books this week. We're always curious to hear what other people thought. Don't forget to head over to Rocky's channel. If you're listening to the audio only version of this, we put this out with audio and video every week on the Comic Boom YouTube channel. So Comic Space Boom ! Once you're there, like, comment, subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you know when new content comes out. If you want to check out our thoughts on the indie books this week, that's over on the Comic Source YouTube channel. Again, just head over to YouTube, do a search for the Comic Source, like, comment, subscribe. And as always, audio versions of all of this are available. Just go to your favorite podcasting platform or app, do a search for the Comic Source and subscribe. You've also got it's been a while since I counted, but we're nearing on 3,000 episodes, I think, of previous content. So definitely will keep you busy. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode, everybody. Appreciate you joining us as always, and we'll talk to you next time.
Catch you later.